You know, when you think about your neighborhood, there's this massive unspoken expectation of just geographical coincidence.
Right.
Like you buy a house, the moving truck pulls up, and you just sort of cross your fingers. You hope the people who share your property line aren't, I don't know, practicing the drums at 3 in the morning.
Yeah. It's a total roll of the dice.
Exactly. It's random. You share a zip code, maybe give a little nod when you take out the trash, but the relationship is fundamentally accidental.
Well, and we rely on those boundaries, right?
Hmm.
Modern housing is built entirely around that concept. Categorization into individual, isolated units.
Yeah, fences make good neighbors and all that.
Exactly. It's clean, it's separated, and frankly, it asks very little of us socially.
But then you look at intentional communities,
Right.
and that entire premise of the accidental neighbor is just completely thrown out the window.
Oh, absolutely.
We're looking at social landscapes that are deliberately engineered from the ground up. So welcome to today's deep dive. If you've ever looked at your street and wondered why we live so isolated from one another, this one is for you.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. Today, we are pulling our insights from a comprehensive Wikipedia overview on intentional communities. We're going to look past the superficial stereotypes and analyze the actual mechanics of how humans have purposely designed their own micro-societies for thousands of years.
Because it goes way back.
Way back. What do the internal dynamics of these groups actually look like, and what can they teach you about the way you construct your own life? Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the psychological baseline of these groups, because this isn't just about sharing a lawnmower, is it?
Far from it. The sociological threshold for an intentional community is actually quite high.
Right.
The source cites this sociologist, William James Metcalf, who argues that the defining metric isn't shared land at all. Yeah, it's what he calls we consciousness. So members of these groups perceive themselves as a continuing separate entity. Their identities are fundamentally intertwined with the collective.
We consciousness, I like that. The way I conceptualize that is it's like curating your social media feed, but applying it to your physical zip code.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like online, you actively block the accounts that drain you and you follow the ideologies you align with. An intentional community is executing that exact same filtering process for physical reality.
Yes.
You are actively selecting the specific people and values you surround yourself with rather than passively accepting whoever happens to get a mortgage next door.
That curation aspect is vital, but it also creates a pretty distinct psychological barrier. Metcalf points out that this we consciousness almost always results in the group seeing themselves as better than the mainstream society they just exited.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Better, like a superiority complex.
Yeah. Kinda, yeah. They have to. I mean, if you're going to go through the immense logistical friction of building a micro-society, you need a unifying belief that the macro-society is deeply flawed.
Right, you need a villain, essentially. Which brings us to the elephant in the room, the terminology, words like utopian and commune.
Oh, yeah. The heavy hitters.
Yeah. The source notes that utopian functions almost exclusively as a pejorative today. It's just shorthand for a naive fantasy.
Yeah, an impossible dream.
Exactly. And commune carries this heavy, inescapable cultural weight, linking it to, like, 1960s counterculture or leftist politics.
Which is a very specific association.
And just to pause here for the listener, we need to be explicitly clear. We are not taking a political side here or endorsing left-wing ideologies.
Absolutely not.
We are strictly, impartially reporting on how the source text defines the social stigma around these specific terms.
Right, the sociological definition. And what's fascinating here is how the Fellowship for Intentional Community actually defines a commune structurally. They completely divorce it from that cultural baggage.
Okay, so how do they define it?
A commune is a highly specific, intense subcategory defined by one single mechanism: 100% income sharing.
Wow. The common purse.
Yes, the
Yeah.
common purse. Everyone's income goes into one pot, and the community dictates the outflow.
That's huge.
It's a massive structural distinction from a broader intentional community, like, say, an eco-village or a co-housing setup.
Right, because in those, you might share a central kitchen or an agricultural project, but you retain your private bank account and your personal equity.
Exactly. The commune takes it all the way.
So we've got this intensely engineered social structure, and the immediate assumption most people make is that this is a modern fad. You know, flower power, the 60s, maybe the 19th century transcendentalists if you're a history buff.
Sure, that's a stereotype.
But the source data paints a completely different picture. This urge to drop out and curate a micro-society is ancient.
Oh, we are looking at historical roots that stretch back millennia.
Millennia.
Yeah, the text highlights ashrams in India dating back to 1500 BCE and Buddhist monasteries emerging around 500 BCE.
Wow.
These were highly structured, intentional communities.
My favorite detail in the text, though, is Pythagoras,
Oh, yeah.
the triangle guy. Around 525 BCE in southern Italy, he founded an intellectual vegetarian commune.
It's wild to think about.
I just love the image of a bunch of ancient Greek philosophers sharing a common purse, debating mathematics, and arguing over a bowl of lentils.
Right. It completely reframes the narrative. Dropping out isn't a modern reaction to the internet or corporate capitalism. Sociologists view this recurring phenomenon as a hardwired human response.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if humans have been doing this continuously for 3.5 millennia, does this historical trend suggest that our standard way of living today, the nuclear family isolated behind a private fence, is actually an unnatural state for us?
From a sociological and evolutionary perspective, yes.
Really?
Yeah, that is the core argument driving this movement. Throughout history, whenever a society rapidly industrializes or urbanizes, we see a massive spike in the formation of intentional communities.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Industrialization requires factory-sized social organization and massive bureaucracy. It operates on a scale that is entirely unsympathetic to human dimensions.
We're just cogs in the machine.
Exactly. So these microsocieties are a cyclical pushback. They're attempts to return to a human scale of living, recreating the collaborative bandwidth of traditional village life that our brains are actually evolved to handle.
I hear that, and the theory sounds beautiful, returning to our evolutionary village roots.
This sounds nice.
But if we are so naturally driven to build these close-knit collaborative villages, why is it still such a fringe movement? It seems to me that building a utopia on paper is a lot easier than managing the plumbing and the egos in reality.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head.
Let's look at the actual mechanics of how these places govern themselves, because the data on friction is revealing.
Yeah, the governance mechanics are where the utopian ideal meets human nature head-on. According to the source, 64% of these communities utilize democratic or consensus decision-making.
Okay.
About 9% operate under hierarchical or authoritarian models, and 11% use a hybrid.
And in the commune specifically, the core structural rule is that the group takes precedence over the nuclear family, right?
Yes.
You have collective households and group decision-making that bleeds heavily into intimate personal affairs. And I have to be honest here, making group decisions by consensus sounds completely exhausting.
There's a lot of meetings.
Functionally, consensus is like being locked in a jury deliberation room for every single life choice. No one gets to leave until everyone agrees on whether to buy a new tractor or who does the dishes.
Your skepticism is well-founded. And sociologist Benjamin Zablocki's research in the text maps out exactly how that friction ignites.
Okay, so what does he say?
Well, by explicitly rejecting traditional hierarchy, these communities don't actually eliminate power dynamics, they just force them underground.
Of course.
Zablocki points out that severe tensions reliably emerge along very specific fault lines. For instance, you almost always see a clash between the original family of founding members and new arrivals.
Right, because the founders have sweat equity, even if the rules technically say everyone is equal.
Precisely. They built the place. Add to that the lack of formal boundaries, which creates an environment ripe for sexual jealousies and chaotic leadership transitions.
I can only imagine.
And interestingly, Zablocki notes that media publicity is a massive stressor.
Really? Publicity?
Yeah. When the outside world looks in, the internal social fabric often tears. Which, this raises an important question. If you were listening to this right now, how well do you genuinely think you could navigate sharing your income, your living space, and your daily choices with 50 other people without an ultimate boss to act as a tiebreaker?
The answer is poorly. Very poorly.
Those people would struggle.
Yeah. But to truly understand what happens when these rule-heavy, consensus-driven microsocieties collide with the macro world outside, the source gives us a series of fascinating global case studies.
It really does.
Let's start with a pure economic collision. Ireland, 1831. The Raleigh estate.
Oh, this is a brilliant example of the common purse taken to the absolute extreme.
Set the scene for us.
So, the estate was owned by a landlord named John Vandeleur. He brought in an English socialist to basically engineer the community's rules, and they built a completely cashless microeconomy.
The mechanics of this are wild. They didn't just share money, they eliminated it.
Yeah.
They used their own localized credit notes, which could only be spent at the commune shop. And the behavioral rules were ironclad.
Very strict.
12-hour workdays, absolute bans on alcohol, tobacco, snuff, and gambling.
And the text notes that structurally it worked. The community prospered, productivity actually went up, and they even added new members.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The entire utopian experiment collapsed in 1833, not from internal friction, but because John Vandeleur, the capitalist landlord who owned the land, lost his entire fortune to gambling debts.
The irony is almost too perfect.
It really is.
A perfectly sober, highly regulated micro-society that strictly banned gambling to maintain its purity, instantly liquidated because of the gambling addiction of its external financial backer.
It's like a Greek tragedy.
It is,
Yeah.
and it illustrates a critical vulnerability.
Mm.
You can engineer the perfect internal economy, but if you don't own the land outright, you are completely at the mercy of the macroeconomy you're trying to escape.
That is a brutal lesson. Let's pivot to a different kind of collision, though. What happens when an intentional community collides with an authoritarian state?
Right.
So before we get into this next one, again, I want to clearly state for the listener that we are entirely neutral. We are not endorsing or judging or taking sides on left-wing Soviet actions or the right-wing community we'll discuss next. We are impartially conveying the historical facts presented in the Wikipedia source.
Absolutely. We're just looking at the mechanics.
Exactly. So after the 1917 revolutions in Russia, we see the proliferation of communities based on the teachings of Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoyans.
Yes, these were agricultural communes built around pacifism, vegetarianism, and a deep, decentralized spiritual philosophy.
Sounds pretty peaceful.
Very peaceful. But by the late 1920s, the Soviet state under collectivization completely wiped them out. Lotters like Yakov Dragonovsky were put on trial and sent to the gulags.
And if we look at the mechanics of why the Soviets purged them, it wasn't because they were capitalists.
Not at all.
It's because the Soviet model of collectivism relied entirely on absolute top-down state control over agriculture and ideology. The Tolstoyans were entirely self-sufficient, they were geographically isolated, and they answered to their own internal moral compass rather than the state.
Right.
To an authoritarian regime, a successful independent micro-society isn't just a quirk, it's a competing parallel power structure. It's an existential threat.
It threatens their monopoly on control. Which brings us to another case study focused on isolationist mechanics, this time in South Africa.
Right, moving to 1991.
The text details a town called Orania. It is an Afrikaner-only community operating on a model of strict demographic exclusivity and self-sufficiency.
And looking purely at the structural data provided in the source, the way they enforced that isolation economically is fascinating. They didn't just buy land, they built their own closed-loop financial system.
Yes. They established their own cooperative bank and issued a localized internal currency called the ora.
And the mechanism behind the ora is exactly what we saw in 1831 Ireland, just modernized.
How so?
Well, it's pegged to the South African rand, but because it's a localized currency, it's incredibly difficult to spend outside the town. That friction is deliberate. It actively prevents capital flight. If you live there, you are functionally forced to circulate your wealth exclusively within the internal microeconomy. It reinforces that we consciousness through sheer financial gravity.
Wow. It is a highly engineered economic moat. And what these global examples, from the Raleigh estate to the Tolstoyans to Orania, what they demonstrate is that the intentional community structure is a completely neutral tool.
A neutral tool, right, yeah.
Yeah. The mechanism of a closed microsociety can be utilized for peaceful agricultural coexistence or extreme racial separatism, or it can be crushed by a state that refuses to tolerate independence. The underlying architecture is the same. The intentionality is what dictates the outcome.
That's a great point. But not all of these communities collapse or isolate, though. Some of them adapt.
Sure.
The source points to the kibbutzim in Israel. They started as these officially organized agrarian communes out in the country. But as Israel urbanized, the kibbutzim didn't just disappear, they mutated.
Yeah, the urban communes.
Exactly. Now you have these urban communes growing inside cities. They took the communal architecture, the shared resources, the consensus governance, and deployed it inside the urban grid, specifically to tackle the alienation of city living through education and social outreach.
It's a brilliant survival strategy, honestly. Instead of treating the city as the enemy to flee from, they treat it as the environment to operate within.
But speaking of fleeing the city, we have to talk about the era that cemented the cultural stereotype, the American 1960s counterculture. The hippies.
Of course. The source examines communities like Cauliflower, which was a utopian living cooperative established in San Francisco in 1967.
Cauliflower with a K, right?
Yes, Cauliflower with a K. And the shift in mechanics here is profound. The text cites author Morgan Shipley, who points out a massive divergence between the hippie communes and the broader political movements of the time.
Right, because the New Left was out protesting, organizing, trying to change the political machinery. The hippies in these communes explicitly refused to engage in that.
They wanted no part of it.
Their intentionality wasn't political, it was mystical. They prioritized free love, anti-capitalism, and unitive spiritual experiences above all else. They weren't fighting the system, they were entirely dropping out of it.
And to drop out of capitalism, their central ethos was voluntary poverty. They consciously stripped away consumerism to achieve spiritual clarity.
But the sociologists in the source text point out an uncomfortable structural reality about these demographics.
Yeah, the demographic breakdown is very telling.
These 1960s communes were overwhelmingly populated by white, upper-middle-class youth. Minorities and low-income individuals almost universally avoided them. And if you think about the mechanics of voluntary poverty, it makes perfect sense.
Oh, absolutely. The privilege is baked right into the premise.
Exactly. Sorry, to build on that, voluntary poverty is only a liberating mystical experience if you have a wealthy safety net to catch you when the commune's crops fail.
Bingo.
You can't actively drop out of a financial system that you were never allowed to fully participate in to begin with. If you already understand the brutal reality of actual poverty, you are not going to fetishize it by moving to a commune.
That is a vital sociological distinction. The 1960s model was, in many ways, an exercise in temporary class tourism.
Wow, class tourism. That's a strong phrase.
It fits the data. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the American commune movement didn't evaporate when the 60s ended.
Right.
The data shows it has actually been expanding again since the mid-1990s.
But they fundamentally altered the architecture. The New York Times is cited here, reporting that modern intentional settlements are attempting to merge the utopian ideals of the 60s with what they call the American predilection for privacy and capital appreciation.
Yes. We see this manifesting in the explosion of co-housing.
Right. Co-housing is the ultimate compromise. You get the engineered we consciousness, you have a shared community house, you probably pool funds for a community garden, and maybe you govern the neighborhood layout through consensus.
Yeah.
But crucially, you do not have a common purse. You retain your individual mortgage, your own equity, and your own private bathroom.
It solves the frictions a Blocky warned about. Modern co-housing recognizes that human beings deeply crave the village-style connection we evolved for. But we also require rigid personal boundaries to feel safe. They realized you don't need to share a bank account to share a purpose.
Which brings us full circle on this incredibly complex sociological journey. We started with Pythagoras and his ancient philosophers.
The triangle guy.
The triangle guy. We broke down the cashless mechanics of a doomed Irish estate, the existential threat pacifist communes posed to the Soviet state, and the closed-loop currency of modern separatist towns. We saw the privilege inherent in 60s voluntary poverty all the way to the pragmatic, equity-building, co-housing developments of today.
It's a huge spectrum, and the unifying thread through all of this data is that intentional communities function as a societal mirror.
A mirror.
Yeah. If you want to know what is broken in a mainstream culture, look at the intentional communities forming on its edges. They reflect exactly what a specific group feels is critically lacking, whether that is economic equality, spiritual depth, or just authentic, unmediated human connection.
Which means the most valuable thing you can do right now is look at your own neighborhood. Are you just existing in a state of geographical coincidence? Or is there a way to engineer a little bit of that we consciousness without moving off the grid or handing over your paycheck to a commune?
The mechanics are scalable. Mutual support, shared local resources, actively curating a supportive physical network. These are tools you can deploy in a suburban cul-de-sac or a high-rise apartment building.
It really makes you rethink the purpose of the private fences we spend so much money building. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Go for it.
As we plunge deeper into an era defined by permanent remote work, artificial intelligence, and increasing digital isolation, where does this ancient human urge go next? Will the next great wave of intentional communities bypass geography entirely, building flawless, consensus-driven utopias in the metaverse?
Oh, that's a wild thought.
Or will the sheer, crushing physical isolation of living our lives through screens spark the most radical localized back to the land movement in human history. Either way, you might want to start paying a little more attention to who you're sharing your neighborhood with.